Picture, for a moment, walking through the bustling markets of ancient Rome 2,000 years ago. Imagine the sights, the sounds, the sheer abundance spilling from every stall. You would see piles of gleaming olives, amphorae overflowing with wine, wheels of cheese, and, of course, mountains of grain feeding the ever-expanding empire. But then, your eyes land on something truly unexpected. Baskets heaped high with fruits that simply shouldn't be there. Bright yellow lemons from the foothills of the Himalayas, plump dates from North Africa, even early varieties of apricots and peaches that had journeyed thousands of miles from the east. To a Roman citizen, this might have seemed like just another day at the market. But to us, looking back through the lens of history, it's nothing short of a miracle. How on earth did an empire known for its legions and laws also become a powerhouse of agricultural innovation? One that could grow and sustain delicate, exotic fruits in an age without refrigeration, without modern logistics, without anything we'd recognize as science. This isn't just a story about farming. It's a story about ambition on an almost unimaginable scale. The story of how Rome didn't just conquer lands, but ecosystems. How they moved soils, redirected rivers, and bent microclimates to their will, all in the pursuit of something as seemingly simple as a sweeter peach or a more fragrant citron. Behind every piece of fruit in those ancient markets lay an epic tale of human ingenuity, of trial and error, of vast networks of trade and knowledge spanning continents. The Romans didn't just want to rule the world, they wanted to taste it, to cultivate it, to make the foreign familiar and the exotic everyday. And in doing so, they laid the foundations for botanical exchange that would shape the world for centuries to come. So join me as we step back into one of history's greatest untold stories, how the Romans grew exotic fruits. We're going to trace the routes these plants traveled, from the remote highlands of Persia to the manicured gardens of Campania. We'll meet the unsung pioneers, the merchants, the gardeners, the soldiers turned farmers who turned impossible dreams into harvestable reality. And we'll uncover the astonishing technologies and clever tricks the Romans used to cheat geography and climate, creating living treasures that fed their people, fueled their economy, and symbolized their divine right to rule the natural world. This is a journey into the heart of an empire that refused to accept limits not on the battlefield, and certainly not at the dinner table. This sprawling empire, stretching from the rainy highlands of Britain to the sun-scorched banks of the Euphrates, became the world's first great botanical network. Every legionary marching into a new territory was more than a soldier. He was a potential scout for the imperial palate, his eyes constantly scanning for new tastes and resources. When a new province was absorbed, it wasn't just its gold, its people, or its strategic ports that were cataloged. Its entire agricultural output was assessed, coveted, and ultimately integrated into the Roman system of consumption. This was a form of conquest that went far beyond the political. It was a wholesale appropriation of nature itself. Consider the sheer logistics of this endeavor. A Roman governor in a newly settled province like Judea or Armenia would immediately dispatch agronomists and botanists, though they wouldn't have used those exact terms, to study local farming practices. They were looking for advantages. What grew well here that couldn't grow in Italy? How did the locals irrigate their fields? What strange fruits did they eat? The answers to these questions were sent back to Rome not as mere reports, but as physical cargo, carefully bundled cuttings from prized fruit trees, shoots from robust grapevines, and small clay pots containing precious seeds, each one a tiny, dormant piece of a foreign land. Merchants, spotting a lucrative opportunity, followed this official channels, becoming de facto agents of botanical exchange. A trader dealing in Egyptian linen might also carry a few date palm offshoots from an oasis farm, knowing they would fetch a high price from a wealthy landowner in Latium desperate to impress his guests with something truly novel. The routes these plant travelers took were the very same roads and sea lanes that moved legions and taxes. The famous Appian Way, a marvel of military engineering, also became a highway for horticulture. A cutting from a Persian peach tree might begin its journey on a camel, transfer to a ship in Antioch, sail across the Mediterranean, and then be loaded onto a wagon in Puteoli for the final land journey to a villa north of Rome. The survival of these living specimens during weeks or months of travel was a testament to both Roman determination and ingenuity. Cuttings were often sealed in wax to retain moisture, or transported with a small ball of their original soil to help them acclimatize to their new home. This was a high-risk, high-reward investment. For every 10 cuttings that perished on the journey, the one that survived could found an entire new industry. This systematic collection created an almost botanical database of the known world. From Egypt, they acquired not just grain, but the knowledge of sophisticated irrigation, along with figs and a superior type of plum. From Persia, a land the Romans both feared and admired, came the ancestors of our modern peaches, apricots, and the citron, a fragrant, thick-rinded precursor to the lemon that was initially prized more for its perfume and used in religious rituals than its intensely sour flesh. North Africa, the empire's breadbasket, offered up the sweet, sugary date palm, a tree that became so synonymous with the region's prosperity that emperors had its image stamped onto coins. Each of these acquisitions was more than just a new foodstuff. It was a symbol of dominance. To serve a Persian peach at a dinner party in Rome was to demonstrate that you, and by extension your entire civilization, had mastered the farthest corners of the earth. You weren't just eating a fruit, you were consuming a testament to Roman power. But possessing these botanical treasures was only half the battle. The true genius of the Roman system lay in what they did next. Imagine a wealthy landowner near Naples, proudly unwrapping a precious peach sapling that had survived the arduous journey from the east. He plants it in the rich volcanic soil of his estate, only to watch it struggle through its first cool, damp Italian winter. The problem was starkly simple. The Mediterranean climate, while excellent for grapes and olives, was not Persia. Many of these exotic prizes came from places with hotter summers, milder winters, or specific dry seasons that Italy couldn't replicate. To simply plant them in an open field was a recipe for failure. The Romans, being masters of engineering and problem-solving, refused to accept this. Their answer was a breathtakingly innovative piece of technology, a precursor to the modern greenhouse known as the specularia. The name itself, derived from the Latin word for mirror or transparent sheet, hints at its function. These were not the glass and steel structures we know today, but their conceptual ancestor. Picture a long, low-frame building, its roof and southern wall not made of tile or wood, but of the most precious and fragile material available, thin, translucent sheets of sliced mica, or for the ultra-wealthy, panes of glass. Yes, Roman glass. While often cloudy and filled with bubbles, it was transparent enough to perform a magical function. It could trap the heat of the sun while shielding delicate plants from the elements. Think of a specularium as a solar-powered life support system for plants. The principle was simple yet brilliant. The transparent ceiling acted like a one-way valve for solar energy. Sunlight could stream in, warming the air and the soil inside, but the trapped heat could not escape as easily. This created a microclimate that could be several degrees warmer than the outside air, effectively extending the growing season by months. A frost that would kill a young citron tree in an open orchard was now rendered harmless. Cold winter rains were kept at bay, while the maximum amount of available winter sunlight was harnessed. For the first time in history, humans could genuinely cheat the seasons. The construction and operation of these structures reveal a sophisticated understanding of horticultural science. The frames were often built against a sunny, south-facing wall to absorb and radiate additional heat, a technique still used by gardeners today. Inside, the beds might be raised and filled with specially mixed soils, even manure, which would generate a small amount of heat as it decomposed, further warming the root systems. Some sources suggest they may have used portable covers made of oiled cloth or even selenite, a transparent crystalline mineral for smaller frames or cold frames for seedlings. The primary challenge, of course, was the material itself. Large, clear panes of glass were prohibitively expensive, a luxury even for the senatorial class. This is why the more common material was mica, specifically a type known as lapis specularis mined in parts of Spain and North Africa. This mineral could be split into remarkably thin, flexible, and surprisingly transparent sheets. While not as clear as glass, it diffused the sunlight perfectly, creating an ideal environment for plant growth without scorching the leaves. The existence of the specularium tells us something profound about Roman priorities. This was not a technology developed for staple crops. Nobody was building vast mica roof structures to grow more wheat or barley. This was a technology of luxury, of prestige, and of a relentless drive for the new and the extraordinary. It was the ultimate status symbol. To dine at a villa where the dessert course included fresh, sun-ripened apricots in the dead of winter was to witness a form of power that was almost divine. The host wasn't just displaying his wealth. He was demonstrating his command over nature itself, a feat that would have seemed as miraculous to his guests as any victory parade. The specularium was the engine room of this botanical theater, a silent, gleaming testament to the fact that when the Romans desired something, they would bend physics and economics to make it happen. Yet for all the technological marvel of the specularium, it was a solution for the elite, a tool for cultivating prestige. The real agricultural revolution, the one that truly fed the empire's insatiable appetite for novelty, was happening out in the open air, and it was rooted in a far more accessible and ingenious practice, the art of grafting. And no fruit tells this story better than the humble fig. We think of figs today as a simple, sweet treat, but to the Romans, they were a canvas for experimentation, a symbol of their botanical mastery, and a testament to how they could take a good thing and make it spectacular through sheer force of innovation. The Romans didn't just grow figs, they reinvented them. They had inherited the basic fig tree from the Greeks and Etruscans, but they were profoundly dissatisfied with its limitations. Wild figs, you see, are often capricious. Their yields can be unpredictable, their size is variable, and their flavors can range from honey-sweet to utterly bland. The Roman agriculturalists, the pragmatic farmers and slave gardeners on vast estates, looked at this inconsistency not as a fact of nature, but as a problem to be solved. Their solution was to wield a knife and a keen eye, performing what can only be described as botanical surgery. Grafting wasn't a Roman invention. It was practiced in China and Mesopotamia long before, but the Romans industrialized it, systemized it, and elevated it to an art form. They became the master grafters of the ancient world. The principle was elegant. by carefully slicing a bud or a shoot from a high-performing fig tree, one that produced exceptionally large, sweet, or prolific fruit, and inserting it into a slit in the branch of a hardy, established rootstock. They could effectively combine the best of two plants. The robust root system of the base tree provided strength and resilience, while the grafted scion dictated the quality and type of fruit produced. It was a perfect merger of brawn and brains. This allowed a single orchard to explode with diversity. A landowner could have a dozen different varieties of fig, all growing on the same foundational trees, each branch telling a different story of taste and origin. The result was an explosion of cultivars that would put a modern farmer's market to shame. The naturalist Pliny the Elder, that relentless cataloger of all things Roman, personally documented 29 distinct varieties in the 1st century, and he was likely only scratching the surface. There was the Livia, named for the Emperor Augustus's wife, known for its earliness and prized for beating other figs to market. The Chian fig was so revered for its sweetness it was often preserved in honey and saved for special occasions. There was an African fig, a Rhodian, a Chalcidian, and even a Tiberian, each name hinting at a story of trade, conquest, or imperial favor. This wasn't just horticulture, it was a living library of taste, a biodiversity crafted by human hands. This revolution in fig cultivation rippled across the entire empire. Wherever the legions established a permanent camp, fig cuttings traveled with them, not as a fragile luxury but as a resilient staple. Veteran soldiers, granted plots of land in places like Gaul, Spain, or North Africa, would plant these improved Roman figs as a reliable source of quick sugar and sustenance. Fig orchards became a hallmark of Roman settlement, a tangible piece of Italy cultivated in foreign soil. They were a food source, but also a psychological comfort, a taste of home in a distant land. The empire, in a very real sense, was bound together not just by roads and laws, but by the roots of grafted fig trees. This mastery over the fig represents a different but equally powerful kind of Roman engineering. It wasn't the grand, monumental engineering of aqueducts and greenhouses, but the subtle, biological engineering of life itself. It demonstrated a deep, intimate understanding of nature's mechanisms and a confident, almost bold willingness to improve upon them. The Romans looked at a fig tree and saw not just a plant, but potential. They asked not just, what does it give us, but what could it give us? In doing so, they turned a simple fruit into a legacy of agricultural ambition that would feed the world long after the last legion had laid down its shield. And among the most potent of these living status symbols was the date palm. If a winter peach from a specularium was a fleeting luxury, a mature date palm standing proudly on an Italian estate was a permanent, towering declaration of wealth and influence. This was not merely a tree, it was a monument. To understand the Roman obsession with the date palm is to look past the fruit itself and see the immense, almost absurd effort required to make it grow so far from its natural home. The sweet, sugary date was not just a dessert, it was the edible proof that its owner possessed resources so vast he could literally reshape the very landscape to his whims. The challenges began with the tree's origins. The true, high-quality date palms that produced the sweetest fruit thrived in the searing, dry heat of North African oases and the irrigated river valleys of the Middle East. Their roots demanded well-drained, sandy soil, and their fronds craved relentless, blazing sunshine. The cool, damp winters and humid summers of central Italy were the complete antithesis of this environment. A date palm planted directly in the ground near Rome would likely succumb to root rot during the first rainy season, its delicate core shivering in the cold. Simply acquiring a healthy offshoot, known as a pup, was a costly endeavor involving specialized merchants and perilous sea voyages. But for a Roman aristocrat, these weren't obstacles. They were opportunities to demonstrate his unparalleled capability. The solution was as extravagant as the problem. Wealthy landowners didn't just buy a tree, they imported an entire cultural package. They recruited, at great expense, skilled gardeners from places like Egypt, Judea, or Numidia. These men were not simple laborers. They were horticultural virtuosos who possessed generations of tacit knowledge about the palm's needs. They became some of the most highly valued slaves or paid freedmen on the estate, their expertise granting them a status far above common field hands. Their sole purpose was to serve as personal physicians to these precious, fragile trees. Their work was constant and meticulous. Since the native soil was often too heavy and wet, these gardeners would excavate vast pits and refill them with custom-blended soils, carting in sand and gravel to replicate the well-drained conditions of a desert wadi. They devised clever irrigation schedules and built protective structures to shield the tender heart of the palm from winter rains and frosts. Some evidence suggests they might have even used portable screens or temporary shelters during the worst weather, a labor-intensive process akin to bundling a giant in a cloak. Every perfectly formed, sweet date that eventually appeared was the direct result of this daily, dedicated intervention. This immense investment transformed the date palm into something beyond a food source. It became a central feature of elite landscape architecture, a living sculpture in the gardens of villas designed for entertaining and impressing guests. To stroll through a Roman garden and see a grove of date palms, their feathery fronds rustling in a breeze they were never meant to feel, was a profound experience. It shouted that the owner had not only conquered a foreign tree, but had also mastered the people and knowledge required to keep it alive. He commanded nature itself. The symbolic weight was so powerful that emperors, understanding the language of power perfectly, frequently featured the date palm on coins minted in North Africa, visually tying the prosperity of that fertile province directly to the stability and strength of imperial rule back in Rome. The tree in the garden was a small-scale echo of the empire itself, something exotic, meticulously maintained, and utterly subjugated to the Roman will. Yet for all their botanical bravado, there was one category of fruit that remained, for the Romans, an elusive and puzzling mystery: true citrus. When we stroll through a modern supermarket, we take lemons, oranges, and limes for granted. But for a Roman, encountering a true lemon would have been a rare and bewildering experience. This brings us to one of the most fascinating debates in Roman archaeology and botany. Did they actually grow these sour, fragrant fruits? Or were they merely expensive, exotic curiosities that arrived in tiny quantities from the far edges of their world? The heart of this mystery lies with two primary pieces of evidence: the literary record and the stunningly preserved ruins of Pompeii. Roman writers, particularly the encyclopedist Pliny the Elder, make references to a fruit called the citrus or malum medicum, the Median apple. But his descriptions are confusing to modern readers. He describes a fruit with a fragrant peel, a sour and inedible flesh, and a remarkable resistance to pests. This doesn't sound like a sweet orange. Scholars are almost certain Pliny was describing the citron, a large, lumpy, thick-rinded ancestor of the lemon, prized more for its intense perfume and its use as an antidote to poison or a natural insect repellent than for its culinary value. It was a luxury item, a status symbol for the elite to hold and smell, not necessarily to eat. Other fleeting references in texts suggest these fruits were so rare and valuable that they were sometimes individually preserved in lead containers, a level of care reserved for the most precious objects. Then there's Pompeii. The volcanic ash from Mount Vesuvius's eruption in 79 AD didn't just destroy the city, it preserved it in a snapshot of daily Roman life. And in the garden of one opulent villa, archaeologists made a breathtaking discovery: the root cavities of what appeared to be a garden of trees. By pouring plaster into these cavities, they created casts of the long-decayed root systems. Among the casts of common trees were several with a distinctive shape that experts believe belong to citron trees. This is our strongest physical evidence that someone, likely a fabulously wealthy merchant or politician, was attempting to cultivate true citrus on Italian soil. But was this a thriving orchard or a struggling vanity project? The fact that we found only one such garden in the entire vast expanse of the Roman world suggests it was the latter, a remarkable, expensive experiment, not a common agricultural practice. This points to a crucial distinction. The Romans were masterful at acclimatizing plants, but true domestication is a different process altogether. They could keep a citron tree alive in a protected garden, but they likely never selectively bred it over generations to improve its flavor or yield, as they had with the fig. The citron remained stubbornly foreign, a finicky import that refused to truly become Roman. Its journey from its probable homeland in the foothills of the Himalayas to a garden in Campania was so long and difficult, and the tree's climatic demands so specific, that it never made the jump from a luxurious novelty to a staple of the orchard. Every fruit would have been a small victory, a testament less to agricultural mastery and more to immense wealth and determination. So, the answer to whether the Romans grew citrus is a fascinating and layered one. Yes, they almost certainly grew the citron in very limited, experimental quantities, pampering it in the microclimates of wealthy estates. But no, they did not have lemon groves dotting the Italian countryside. The lemon, the orange, the lime, these would remain wonders of the East for centuries to come, their widespread cultivation in Europe awaiting the gardening innovations of the medieval Arabs and later the Renaissance Italians. The Roman encounter with citrus is a story of the limits of even their formidable power. It shows us that for all their skill in moving mountains and redirecting rivers, some of nature's treasures remain just out of reach, their secrets not yet unlocked. While the citron remained a rare and puzzling outsider, another fruit from the East was embraced with such fervor that it became woven into the very fabric of Roman culture. This was the pomegranate, a fruit so laden with symbolism, flavor, and medicinal promise that the Romans' passion for it bordered on obsession. Unlike the aloof citron, the pomegranate was a fruit they could truly make their own, and they devoted astonishing energy to ensuring its ruby-red seeds graced their tables in abundance. Its journey from a Middle Eastern native to a staple of the Italian orchard is a masterclass in targeted cultivation and cultural absorption. The pomegranate's appeal was immediate and multifaceted. First, there was its striking appearance. Imagine a Roman merchant seeing one for the first time, a tough, leathery rind hiding a geometric marvel of hundreds of glistening, jewel-like seeds, each bursting with a unique balance of sweet and tart juice. It was a fruit that was both a puzzle and a treasure chest, but its value went far beyond the aesthetic. Roman physicians, following the teachings of Hippocrates and Galen, believed in the doctrine of the four humors, where health was a balance of bodily fluids. The pomegranate, with its astringent juice and binding properties, was considered a powerhouse for treating everything from digestive troubles to fevers. Its bark and rind were used in concoctions to combat intestinal parasites, making it as much a fixture in the medicine cabinet as on the dessert platter. This deep-seated belief in its healing power fueled demand, and Roman agriculturists were eager to supply it. But the pomegranate tree, or Punica granatum, presented its own set of challenges. It thrived in the hot, arid climates of Persia and the Levant, but it was notoriously sensitive to Italy's colder, wetter winters and its clay-heavy soils. A pomegranate tree planted in waterlogged ground would quickly succumb to root rot. The Roman solution was a perfect example of their practical genius. They didn't try to change the entire climate. They changed the very ground the tree stood on. They became experts at creating what we would now call well-drained raised beds on a massive scale. Gardeners would excavate large planting holes and refill them with a carefully calibrated mix of original soil, sand, and crushed pottery or gravel. This custom blended earth mimicked the dry, rocky foothills the tree naturally called home, allowing excess water to drain away from the vulnerable roots. This meticulous approach to soil science was just the beginning. The Romans also mastered the art of strategic planting. They learned to position pomegranate orchards on south-facing slopes, where the trees could bask in maximum sunlight and be sheltered from the biting north winds. Some sources suggest that in particularly frost-prone areas, they might even swaddle young trees in protective layers of straw or cloth during the coldest nights, a labor-intensive practice that highlights the value they placed on a successful harvest. Through this combination of soil amendment and microclimate management, they turned parts of Italy, particularly the warmer southern regions like Campania, into a second homeland for the pomegranate. It was no longer an imported luxury. It was a domestic crop, its cultivation a point of pride for any serious farmer. Yet, to only speak of its agricultural journey is to miss half the story. The pomegranate's roots sank even deeper into the Roman psyche through mythology and ritual. They inherited a powerful symbol from the Greeks, the story of Proserpina, or Persephone as she was known to the Greeks. The tale of the young goddess abducted by Pluto, ruler of the underworld, and tricked into eating 6 pomegranate seeds, thus binding her to spend half of each year in the realm of the dead, was profoundly resonant. For the Romans, the pomegranate became inextricably linked to the core cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Its countless seeds made it a universal symbol of fertility and abundance, a common motif in wedding ceremonies and art, wishing the new couple a fruitful union. But its blood-red juice and its role in the Proserpina myth also gave it a chthonic underworld connection, making it a fitting offering to the dead during funerary rites and festivals like the Parentalia. This duality made the pomegranate uniquely powerful. It was a fruit that could bless a marriage and honor the deceased. It promised vitality in its medicine and acknowledged mortality in its myth. This rich tapestry of meaning ensured its place was secure far beyond the farm or the clinic. It appeared in intricate mosaics on villa floors, its image bursting with seeds to display the owner's wealth and sophistication. It was carved into stone sarcophagi, a hopeful symbol of renewal in the afterlife. The pomegranate proved that the most enduring exotic fruits in Rome were those that the empire could not only grow but could also truly understand, those whose roots could find nourishment not just in Italian soil, but in the very heart of Roman myth and meaning. While wine was the undisputed king of Roman viticulture, fueling trade, rituals, and daily life, To think the grape's story ends, there is to miss a fascinating chapter of culinary innovation. The Romans' relationship with this versatile fruit was far more nuanced. Beyond the vast vineyards dedicated to crushing and fermentation lay another, more intimate agricultural pursuit, the quest for the perfect table grape. This was horticulture driven not by the demands of the masses, but by the personal desires of the connoisseur, a pursuit of pleasure that led to some of the most sophisticated selective breeding the ancient world would ever see. The drive for better eating grapes came from the top. The elite of Roman society viewed the after-dinner course, known as the secunda mensa, as a critical stage for display. Offering a bowl of bland, seedy, or tough-skinned local grapes was a social misstep. Serving a plump, sweet, novel variety, however, could make a guest's evening and secure a host's reputation for sophistication. This created a powerful economic incentive for farmers and estate managers to experiment relentlessly. They weren't just growing food, they were crafting edible luxury items for the most discerning and wealthy market in the world. The Roman agricultural writers Cato, Varro, and Columella spend considerable ink not just on wine grapes, but on the specific care, propagation, and even storage techniques for the finest table varieties, detailing how to keep them fresh long after the harvest had ended. This intensive focus led to an explosion of diversity. Through careful observation and years of patient cross-pollination, Roman growers developed hundreds of distinct cultivars, each with its own loyal following. Some were celebrated for their earliness, hitting the market in late summer to great fanfare. Others were prized for their late ripening nature, their flavor concentrated by the cooler autumn sun. There were grapes with strikingly colored flesh, from deep amethyst to pale green, and grapes celebrated for their complex flavor profiles, ranging from honey sweet to a refreshing, almost tart crispness. The sheer variety was a testament to a culture that viewed taste as a worthy subject for scientific inquiry and artistic expression. Perhaps the most astonishing evidence of their advanced breeding skill lies in their attempts to create a seedless grape. The concept was certainly known to them. Pliny the Elder describes a specific variety from the eastern provinces known as the Staphyles or raisin grape, which was celebrated for being almost entirely free of pips. He notes that these grapes were so tender and sweet, they were often dried into raisins right on the branch, a technique known as letting them ripen in their own juice. Creating such a fruit was no accident. It required a form of protogenetics, a generations-long process of selecting and propagating vines that exhibited this desirable trait. A farmer would notice a branch on one of his vines that, by a random genetic mutation, produced fruit with fewer or smaller seeds. He would then carefully take cuttings from that specific branch alone, grafting them onto strong rootstock to create an entire new generation of vines that carried forward that prized characteristic. This patient, meticulous work over decades slowly amplified the seedless trait, pushing nature incrementally closer to the perfect, effortless eating experience. The success of these ventures hinged on more than just breeding. It demanded ingenious preservation. A perfect grape is a fleeting thing, ripe for only a brief window. The Romans developed remarkable methods to extend this season, effectively creating the ancient world's first fresh fruit import business. The most prized clusters were carefully selected and stored in specially designed dark, cool rooms, or even suspended in sealed jars within deep, cold wells to slow their decay. Some were packed in barrels of sawdust or bran to make the long journey from farms in Greece or Asia Minor to the tables of Rome, arriving weeks after they were picked as a rare and expensive treat. This ability to defy seasonality, to present a fresh grape in the dead of winter, was the ultimate flex of agricultural and logistical prowess, a magic trick that never failed to impress. The humble table grape, therefore, represents a different kind of Roman conquest, one not of territory, but of taste, time, and genetics, proving their ambition touched every corner of the natural world. From the lush, terraced gardens of Persia, a fruit began a journey that would captivate an empire. The peach, with its velvety skin and sweet, sun-warmed flesh, was no ordinary commodity. Known to the Persians as the Persian apple, it was a symbol of immortality and life in Zoroastrian mythology, a fruit so cherished it was often depicted in intricate carvings and woven into royal tapestries. Its journey westward began not with a formal trade agreement, but through the slow, relentless osmosis of empire. As Roman legions pushed into the eastern provinces, clashing with the Parthians and later the Sassanids, soldiers and merchants encountered these orchards for the first time. The taste was a revelation, a juiciness and floral aroma unlike anything native to the Italian peninsula. These men, far from home, became the fruit's first and most effective ambassadors, carrying stories of its incredible flavor back to a Rome always hungry for the next luxury. This initial curiosity quickly evolved into a high-stakes demand within the highest echelons of Roman society. Emperors, in particular, developed a notorious fondness for the peach. The historian Ale writes of the Emperor Elagabalus, a ruler known for his decadent excess, who reportedly used peaches not as food, but as ammunition in lavish palace games, pelting his guests with the expensive fruit during feasts. While this might be an extreme anecdote, it underscores the peach's status as a powerful symbol of wealth and imperial privilege. To serve fresh peaches at a state dinner was to demonstrate a command over geography and trade that few could rival. This created immense pressure on the agricultural sector to solve the single greatest problem. The Persian peach tree was ill-suited to the Italian climate. It craved the hot, dry summers and sharply cold winters of the Iranian plateau, not the milder, more humid conditions of the Mediterranean. The solution emerged not from the palaces, but from the dirt-streaked hands of Roman gardeners and botanists on country estates. These unsung pioneers embarked on a generations-long project of selective breeding and acclimatization. Their process was one of meticulous observation and patience. They would collect the stones from the best peaches that arrived from the east, those with the richest flavor, the most vibrant color, the firmest flesh. These stones were then planted, and the resulting saplings were carefully monitored. The gardeners were looking for outliers, for those rare individual trees that showed a greater resilience to local conditions, perhaps a slightly higher tolerance for damp soil, or a better ability to set fruit after a cooler spring. The most successful trees were then propagated through grafting, a technique the Romans had perfected with figs. A scion from a hardy, locally grown tree would be grafted onto robust rootstock, combining Persian taste with Italian resilience. Over decades, this patient work yielded tangible results. They developed early cultivars that could not only survive but thrive in cooler European climates. Varieties emerged with names that hinted at their new identity. A peach might be called the precocia for its early ripening, a crucial adaptation to shorter growing seasons. The poet Ovid even makes a likely reference to these cultivated peaches in his works, calling them persica, but noting they were grown in Italian gardens, a clear sign of their successful transplantation. This was a monumental achievement in bioengineering. The Romans had effectively redesigned the peach, transforming a fragile exotic import into a viable, if still prestigious, domestic crop. They had stolen a piece of Persia's botanical soul and taught it to sing in a Roman tongue. This remarkable transformation of the Persian peach, however, was just one chapter in a much larger story of Roman botanical ingenuity. If the peach was a project of acclimatization, the story of the apricot represents something far more profound, a deliberate act of alchemy where Roman agriculturists took a foreign fruit and fundamentally reshaped its very identity. Our journey now takes us further north to the rugged, high-altitude landscapes of Armenia, where a small, rather unremarkable fruit grew wild. The locals knew it as the Armenian plum, or Prunus armeniaca, and to the casual observer, it might have seemed like just another tart, hardy stone fruit. But when Roman agronomists encountered it, they didn't just see a fruit, they saw a canvas of extraordinary potential. The raw material they had to work with was a world away from the plump, honey-sweet apricots we enjoy today. The wild Armenian plum was typically smaller, with a more fibrous flesh and a notably astringent, almost bitter skin. Its primary virtue was its incredible hardiness. It could withstand colder winters and poorer soils than many of its more delicate relatives. For the Romans, this resilience was the key that unlocked the door. They recognized that this tough little fruit could be the perfect foundation upon which to build something new, something that combined the robustness of a mountain plant with the luxurious flavor demanded by the Roman palate. This wasn't a simple matter of planting a few seeds and hoping for the best. It was a systematic, multi-generational breeding program that would require patience, keen observation, and a willingness to experiment on a grand scale. The process began with the most critical step, selection. Roman estate managers and their teams of slave gardeners would collect the seeds, or stones, from the very best wild specimens they could find, those rare trees that, by chance, produced fruit that was slightly sweeter, slightly larger, or slightly less bitter than the rest. These chosen stones were then planted in the experimental nurseries of vast Italian estates. As the saplings grew, the gardeners would subject them to a rigorous process of evaluation, noting which ones showed the most promise. This was a slow and painstaking form of early genetics, a testament to the Roman belief that nature could be guided and improved through human will and intellect. But selection from seed was only the beginning. The true magic, the real alchemy, happened through the art of grafting. Once a particularly promising apricot tree was identified, its superior genetic material could be multiplied and shared. A skilled gardener would take cuttings, known as scions, from this elite tree and graft them onto the hardy rootstock of other trees, including closely related plums and even almonds. This technique did more than just clone the good tree. It could actually enhance it. The robust root system of a native plum tree would impart vigor and disease resistance to the apricot scion, while the scion itself would dictate the quality of the fruit. It was a perfect symbiotic partnership engineered by human hands. Through this relentless cycle of selective breeding and clever grafting, the Romans slowly but surely sculpted the wild Armenian plum into something entirely new. They amplified its sweetness, expanded its size, and smoothed its texture. Within a few generations, the fruit that emerged from Italian orchards was distinct enough from its wild ancestor that it earned its own name, the praecocum, or early ripening one, a name that eventually evolved through Arabic and French into our modern word apricot. This name itself is a clue to another of its prized new characteristics. The Romans, through their cultivation, had not only improved its flavor, but had also managed to coax it into fruiting earlier in the summer. giving them a coveted spot in the seasonal fruit calendar long before other stone fruits were ready. The literary record leaves us compelling evidence of this transformation. The agricultural writer Lucius Junius Moderatus Columella, in his seminal work De Re Rustica, provides what might be the first clear description of this new, improved fruit growing in Italian gardens. He distinguishes it from other plums and peaches, noting its specific cultivation requirements and its valued place in the orchard. His contemporary, Pliny the Elder, goes even further in his natural history, documenting the successful cultivation of the Malum armeniacum, the Armenian apple, and explicitly tracing its origins to Armenia before detailing its propagation in Rome. These aren't just passing mentions. They are first-hand accounts of an active, ongoing agricultural revolution. The apricot stands as a timeless testament to Roman horticultural ambition, a fruit that began as a wild mountain seedling and was reborn, through vision and skill, as a sweet, sun-kissed symbol of their power to not just find nature's treasures, but to reinvent them. While the apricot represents a story of transformation, another fruit held a place of such deep-rooted and multifaceted importance in Roman life that its near disappearance from our modern tables feels almost like a historical oversight. This was the quince, a knobbly, golden yellow fruit that, to the Roman palate, was far more than a simple snack. It was a cornerstone of their cuisine, a key ingredient in their medicine, and a versatile preserve that could bring a taste of autumn to the deepest winter. Unlike the flashy peach or the exotic date, the quince's value lay not in its rarity, but in its incredible utility and its unique, almost magical properties when cooked. The Romans didn't just grow quinces, they cultivated them with a passion that bordered on reverence. They inherited the tree, Sidonia oblonga, from the Greeks, who associated it with Aphrodite and considered it a symbol of love and fertility. The Romans adopted this symbolism wholeheartedly, often offering quinces at weddings and using them in rituals meant to ensure happiness and prosperity. But their interest was intensely practical as well. The quince tree is remarkably hardy, resistant to many pests and diseases that plagued other fruits, and it thrived across the diverse climates of the Italian peninsula. An orchard of quince trees was a reliable investment, producing heavy, fragrant crops year after year with relatively little fuss. This reliability made it a staple on farms both large and small, from the vast latifundia estates to the more modest plots of common citizens. Yet, to bite into a raw quince is to understand the central puzzle of this fruit. Its flesh is hard, incredibly astringent, and mouth-puckeringly sour. A fresh quince, straight from the tree, is practically inedible. The genius of Roman gastronomy lay in recognizing that this was not a flaw, but a challenge and an opportunity. They discovered that applying heat performed a kind of culinary alchemy on the quince. Through roasting, boiling, or baking, its hard, pale flesh undergoes a breathtaking transformation, softening into a tender, deep, rosy pink concoction with a complex, floral sweetness entirely absent in its raw state. This metamorphosis made the quince the ultimate kitchen project fruit, a blank canvas upon which Roman cooks could paint masterpieces of flavor. Our most detailed window into this culinary world comes from the oldest known cookbook to survive from antiquity, a text known as Apicius. Within its pages, the quince features not as an occasional ingredient, but as a star player. The recipes reveal a sophisticated understanding of how to balance its unique qualities. One of the most celebrated dishes was patina de codorniz, a sophisticated baked custard or soufflé combining pureed cooked quince with eggs, honey, pepper, and a splash of passum, a sweet raisin wine. The result was a sweet and savory delight that would have been served as part of the main course. Quinces were also peeled, cored, and slowly stewed in honey and wine with a pinch of cumin or black pepper, creating a spiced compote that complemented roasted meats. They were even hollowed out, stuffed with a mixture of minced meat, herbs, and honey, then baked until tender, creating a dish that beautifully married savory and sweet in a way that defined much of elite Roman cooking. In every instance, the quince was never merely a fruit. It was an essential flavoring agent, its pectin-rich flesh naturally thickening sauces, and its intense aroma perfuming entire dishes. But the Romans' most enduring innovation with the quince was their mastery of preservation. Their desire for these flavors wasn't limited to the short autumn harvest season. They developed a method for candying quince that was so effective it could keep the fruit edible for years. The process was labor-intensive but revolutionary. The finest quinces would be peeled, cored, and slowly boiled in a potent syrup made from honey or reduced grape must, known as defrutum or sapa. This wasn't a simple simmer. It was a long, slow process that allowed the fruit to absorb the sweet syrup while its own natural pectin worked to thicken the mixture. The cooked fruit would then be placed in ceramic jars and sealed with a layer of the same syrup, creating an airtight environment that prevented spoilage. The most luxurious version of this preserve was called melomli or honey apple. Some recipes even called for storing the quinces whole in jars, filled entirely with honey, a fantastically expensive method that resulted in a powerful, decadent condiment. Over time, the continued interaction between the fruit's pectin and the sugar in the honey or syrup would cause the preserve to solidify into a dense, sliceable paste. This was essentially the direct ancestor of what we know today as membrillo or quince cheese, a delicacy still popular in Spain and Portugal. The Roman version could be sliced and served as a sweet treat alongside cheese and nuts for the secunda mensa, or dried further into chewy candies that could be packed for journeys. This ability to capture the essence of the quince and hold it in a state of suspended animation was a triumph of food science. It meant a taste of Rome's abundance could be enjoyed by a legionary on the damp frontier of Britain or a merchant sailing to Alexandria, a tangible, sweet reminder of home that defied distance and season. The quince, therefore, was more than a forgotten delicacy. It was a testament to Roman culinary ingenuity, a fruit whose true potential was unlocked not by nature, but by the skilled hands of a culture that knew how to wait for its sweetness. Beyond the practical orchard and the experimental garden lay a realm of cultivation driven by pure, unadulterated delight. While fruits like the quince were celebrated for their utility and the date palm for its prestige, one tree captured the Roman imagination for its sheer, joyous abundance and its fleeting, irreplaceable flavor, the mulberry. To the Romans, this wasn't just a plant. It was a seasonal event, a cascade of jewel-toned berries that represented the very essence of a Mediterranean summer. Their passion for it went so deep, and their methods for enjoying it became so elaborate, that it blossomed into a full-blown mania, a celebration of flavor that connected the humblest street vendor to the most reclining patrician. The Romans were intimately familiar with all three primary species: the deep, wine dark black mulberry, the startlingly sweet white mulberry, and the vibrantly tart red mulberry. Each had its devotees and its specific purpose. The black mulberry, Morus nigra, was universally hailed as the supreme variety for eating fresh. Its complex, balanced flavor, a perfect harmony of sweetness and sharpness, and its large, juicy berries made it the undisputed king of the fruit bowl. The white mulberry, Morus alba, was prized for its intense, almost honeyed sweetness, though Romans knew its delicate berries were too fragile to travel far, making it a rare, hyper-local treat. And the red mulberry, native to North America, was of course unknown to them, a reminder that even their vast botanical network had its limits. While we often associate the mulberry with the secretive art of sericulture, the cultivation of silkworms, which feed exclusively on white mulberry leaves, this was a much later development, introduced to the Byzantine Empire centuries after the Classical period. For the Romans of the Republic and early Empire, the mulberry was first and foremost about taste. Harvesting these precious berries was an exercise in both speed and delicacy, a race against time and gravity. A ripe mulberry is a notoriously tender thing, practically begging to fall from the branch and stain the earth below. Roman agricultural manuals describe the preferred method: spreading large, thin cloths or nets beneath the canopy of the tree. Workers would then gently shake the branches, causing a rain of perfectly ripe berries to tumble down onto the waiting canvas. This technique minimized bruising and kept the precious fruit clean, separating it from the dust and debris of the ground. For the highest quality fruit destined for the tables of the elite, an even more painstaking approach was used. Each berry was individually hand-picked at the absolute peak of ripeness and placed gingerly into shallow baskets. This was a task that required a light touch and a keen eye, often entrusted to children or skilled slaves who could navigate the branches without causing damage. The entire operation was a frantic, joyful scramble, as the window for perfect ripeness was notoriously short, sometimes lasting only a few days per tree. But the true testament to Roman mulberry mania was what they did next. A fresh mulberry is a glorious thing, but its season is heartbreakingly brief. The Romans, in their relentless desire to capture and extend pleasure, developed an array of preservation techniques that turned this ephemeral treat into a year-round luxury. The most common method was drying. Berries were laid out on racks in the hot sun, slowly transforming into chewy, sweet morsels that could be stored in amphorae and added to breads, stews, or simply eaten as a confection during the winter months. Yet the most celebrated and luxurious preservation method was to create a thick, condensed syrup. The finest black mulberries would be crushed, and their juice slowly simmered in large lead or bronze pots for hours, often mixed with honey and reduced grape must, until it thickened into a rich, purple-black concentrate known as succus marorum. This mulberry syrup was a culinary marvel. It could be used as a topping for cheeses and fresh snow brought down from the mountains to make an early form of sorbet. It was mixed with water to create a refreshing summer drink, and it was valued by physicians for its supposed astringent properties. Apicius includes recipes that use this syrup as a glaze for roasted game birds or as a base for sophisticated sweet and sour sauces. To possess a jar of this deep, flavorful syrup in the depths of January was to hold a bottled essence of summer, a tangible memory of sun-drenched days that could be unlocked with a single spoonful. In the mulberry, the Romans found a fruit that embodied their philosophy perfectly, a natural gift so delightful that it was worth any amount of human effort to cultivate, harvest, and preserve, ensuring its joy could be savored long after the last leaves had fallen. While the Romans mastered the art of moving entire trees and creating microclimates, perhaps their most profound botanical talent was even more intimate and precise. They learned to perform what can only be described as living surgery on the plants themselves, a practice that allowed them to rewrite the very genetic destiny of an orchard. This was the sophisticated science of grafting, and Roman agricultural writers like Columella and Varro documented these techniques with a level of detail that reveals a truly scientific approach to horticulture. Their surviving texts are not just philosophical musings. They are practical, step-by-step manuals, filled with advice that would not be out of place in a modern gardening guide. These authors understood that grafting was the ultimate key to consistency, variety, and resilience, a way to cheat time and accelerate nature's own slow processes of selection. The fundamental principle was both simple and revolutionary. By taking a small shoot or a single bud, known as a scion, from a tree that produced exceptional fruit, a gardener could fuse it onto the sturdy, established root system of a different tree, known as the rootstock. The two would grow together as one, combining their best qualities. The robust, disease-resistant roots of a local wild plum tree, for instance, could provide a powerful foundation, while the grafted scion from a prized Persian peach would dictate the flavor, size, and quality of the fruit produced on the branches above. This was the pinnacle of agricultural optimization, allowing Romans to grow delicate, exotic varieties on root systems that were perfectly adapted to local Italian soils and climates. It turned a finicky import into a reliable producer. The Romans didn't have just one method for this. They developed an entire toolkit of grafting techniques, each suited for a specific purpose. Varro describes the most common approach, cleft grafting, used on larger branches. This involved splitting a sawed-off limb on the rootstock tree with a sharp wedge, then carefully whittling the base of the scion into a sharp V shape to slot perfectly into that cleft. The alignment was everything. The craftsman had to ensure the thin layer of living tissue just beneath the bark, known as the cambium layer, of both the scion and the rootstock made direct contact. This was the lifeline where the healing and fusion would occur. The entire graft was then sealed with wax or clay to lock in moisture and protect the delicate union from pests and rot, while it knitted itself together over the following weeks. For more delicate operations, they employed a technique called bud grafting, or tea budding. This was a remarkably efficient method that required only a single bud from the desired tree instead of a whole shoot. The gardener would make a precise T-shaped incision in the bark of the rootstock, gently lift the flaps, and insert a bud carefully carved from another plant. This bud was then wrapped securely in place with damp linen or bark strips. If successful, that single point of contact would eventually swell, push out new growth, and become the sole source of branches for that part of the tree. This allowed a single rootstock to host a dozen different varieties, each originating from a different, expertly placed bud. The level of precision and understanding of plant physiology required for this is astounding. The most spectacular result of this artistry was the creation of what we might call the Roman fruit salad tree. Columella writes with evident pride of seeing a single tree heavily laden with different fruits, multiple varieties of apples, pears, and plums, all sharing the same trunk. This was more than a party trick. It was a masterclass in space management and sustained harvest. On a smaller estate, a single multi-grafted tree could provide a succession of ripening times, ensuring a fresh supply of fruit over many months instead of a single overwhelming glut. It was also the ultimate display of a gardener's skill and a landowner's sophistication. To walk a guest through an orchard and point out a branch of Syrian almonds, another of Greek figs, and a third of Egyptian dates, all thriving on one hardy Italian rootstock, was to demonstrate a command over nature that felt almost divine. This living mosaic was a perfect symbol of the empire itself, many distinct parts, grafted together by human ingenuity into a single, productive, and powerful whole. But all this botanical genius, the greenhouses, the grafting, the patient breeding would have been utterly meaningless without one crucial, life-giving element: water. A fruit tree, especially one struggling to adapt to a new climate, is a thirsty being. Its delicate blossoms, its swelling fruit, its very survival through a dry Italian summer, all depend on a reliable and abundant supply. For the Romans, water was never left to chance. Their ability to cultivate exotic fruits was built upon a foundation of hydraulic engineering so advanced that it still inspires awe today. They didn't just find water, they moved it, measured it, and mastered it on a continental scale, turning arid landscapes into veritable Edens through sheer force of intellect and will. The most iconic symbols of this hydraulic mastery are, of course, the aqueducts. We often picture them as those magnificent, soaring stone arches marching across the countryside, and indeed they were. But to see them only as architectural marvels is to miss their true purpose. They were the cardiovascular system of the entire Roman agricultural machine, delivering not just drinking water to cities, but lifeblood to farms and orchards miles from the nearest river. The engineering behind them was breathtakingly precise. Roman surveyors, using simple tools like the groma and courbates, would map out a course with a minute gradient, often as little as a 1 in 2,500 slope. This meant that for every mile the aqueduct traveled, it might drop only a few feet, allowing water to flow gently and continuously from a distant spring in the highlands to a settlement, or a vast estate dozens of miles away. This was not brute force. It was a delicate, calculated coaxing of nature. For the fruit grower, this reliable, state-provided water was a game changer. An aqueduct's channel, or specus, would often have purpose-built diversion points where landowners could, with official permission, tap into the flow to feed irrigation channels across their property. This wasn't a mere trickle from a bucket. It was a constant, predictable supply that could be channeled through a network of smaller, plaster-lined ditches directly to the base of each and every tree in an orchard. A peach sapling from Persia, vulnerable to drought, could now be guaranteed a steady drink even during the hottest months. A pomegranate tree, requiring careful watering to avoid rot, could receive exactly the amount it needed. The aqueduct turned horticulture from a gamble with the weather into a calculated science. Yet aqueducts served the large-scale needs of entire regions. For the day-to-day management of water on the farm itself, the Romans employed a suite of ingenious mechanical tools. The most famous of these is the Archimedes screw, though the Romans likely improved upon the Greek design. Picture a large wooden screw or a tight spiral housed inside a cylinder. As a laborer or a donkey turned a crank, the bottom end would be placed in a water source like a stream or an irrigation cistern. The rotating spiral would literally lift water up the tube and pour it out the top into a waiting channel. This simple, effective device could move large volumes of water with relatively little effort, and it was perfect for lifting water from a lower source to fill the higher ditches that fed an orchard on a slope. For deeper wells or more significant lifting needs, they used the shaduf, a tool they encountered in Egypt and adopted widely. This was a long pivoting pole with a bucket on one end and a counterweight on the other. A worker could pull the bucket down into the water, and the counterweight would make it easy to swing it up and empty it into a channel. It was a technology of elegant simplicity, allowing one person to irrigate a surprisingly large area. And for the largest estates, there was the mighty water wheel, the noria. These massive wooden wheels, often turned by a treadmill walked by slaves or animals, were fitted with pots or compartments that would dip into a river, fill with water, and then dump it into an aqueduct at the top of their rotation. These machines were the workhorses of Roman irrigation, the technologies that translated the grand ambition of the aqueduct into the practical, life-giving sip of water for a single precious tree. The ultimate expression of Roman hydraulic skill, however, wasn't just in moving water, but in conserving and allocating it with almost legal precision. In the water-scarce provinces of North Africa and the Middle East, where dates and citrons were king, they developed the Qanat system, though they knew it by other names. This was a subterranean marvel. Instead of building upwards, they dug down, tunneling deep into the earth to tap into underground aquifers. A series of vertical shafts were dug at intervals for ventilation and excavation, connected at the bottom by a gently sloping tunnel that would guide the groundwater by gravity over many miles to the surface where it was needed. This method was incredibly efficient, preventing the massive evaporation loss that would have occurred in open canals under the desert sun. It was these hidden, underground rivers that made the sprawling date palm oases of the empire possible. And this carefully harnessed water was not wasted. Roman law and custom treated water as a precious communal resource, but its allocation was managed with meticulous fairness. On a large estate, the flow of water through irrigation channels would be controlled by a system of sluice gates and weirs, often made of wood or lead. The estate manager, or villicus, would have a strict schedule, perhaps granting water to the peach orchard for 2 hours, then diverting it to the fig groves, then to the vegetable gardens. This ensured every crop received its share. The poet and farmer Virgil even writes of the sound of water being the constant music of the farm, a testament to how central this managed flow was to daily life. In the Roman world, water was never merely found, it was governed. It was this unparalleled ability to command every drop, from the monumental arc of an aqueduct to the precise turn of a sluice gate, that truly unlocked their agricultural potential, turning their dreams of exotic harvests into a lush, dripping reality. While the Romans engineered grand aqueducts to command water and built greenhouses to trap the sun, they understood that the true secret to any plant's life lay hidden beneath the surface, in the dark, unseen world of the soil. You can bring a tree across an ocean, you can shield it from the wind, and you can flood it with water, but if its roots are suffocating in poor earth, the entire endeavor is doomed. The Roman approach to soil was not one of passive acceptance. It was a science of active, almost alchemical transformation. They looked at a patch of heavy, damp clay or dry, barren sand and saw not a limitation, but a raw material waiting to be perfected. Their agricultural writers, men like Cato, Varro, and Columella, dedicated entire chapters to soil management, revealing a sophisticated, almost modern understanding that different plants craved different foundational environments. For their precious exotic fruits, they weren't just planting in dirt. They were crafting a custom-made substrate, a master blend of minerals and organic matter designed to mimic a tree's distant homeland. This practice of soil amendment began with a fundamental diagnosis. A Roman estate manager, the villicus, was expected to be an expert in terroir long before the word was ever coined. He would walk his land, kneading the soil between his fingers, tasting it, even smelling it after a rain to assess its composition. He knew that the rich, volcanic soil of Campania was a gift from the gods for grapes and olives, but it might be too dense and moist for a Persian peach tree that evolved in the dry, gravelly foothills of the Zagros Mountains. The solution was to fundamentally change the soil's physical structure. To improve drainage in heavy clay soils, a death sentence for moisture-sensitive roots like those of the pomegranate or citron. They would incorporate vast quantities of sand, gravel, and even crushed pottery and brick, known as testacea. This wasn't just waste disposal. It was brilliant agro-engineering. The pottery shards acted like tiny terracotta pipes within the soil, creating air pockets and channels that allowed excess water to drain away, preventing the root rot that could kill a valuable tree in a single season. They were literally building an underground ventilation system, one crushed pot at a time. But physical structure was only half the battle. The Romans possessed a deep empirical understanding of soil fertility, the need to replenish what the plants consumed. The most common and valued amendment was manure, and their writings reveal a nuanced hierarchy of animal waste. Columella provides detailed advice that would make any modern organic farmer nod in approval. Pigeon and poultry manure were considered the hottest and most potent, to be used sparingly and well composted to avoid burning delicate roots. Goat and sheep manure was highly prized for its balanced nutrient content, while pig manure was seen as too cold and wet, best suited for certain types of field crops rather than fragile orchard trees. The sophistication didn't end there. They practiced sheet composting, growing specific crops like legumes and beans not just for food, but to be plowed directly back into the earth as green manure, a technique that naturally fixed nitrogen into the soil and improved its tilth. Perhaps their most fascinating and innovative soil amendment was the use of marl, a natural mixture of clay and calcium carbonate. The discovery that certain chalky, crumbly soils could dramatically improve crop yields was a landmark moment in Roman agriculture. They identified different types of marl, white, red, and blue, and debated their best uses. When worked into acidic or tired soils, marl acted as a powerful liming agent, neutralizing acidity and making the soil more hospitable to a wider range of plants. More importantly for fruit trees, the calcium carbonate strengthened cell walls, leading to healthier root systems and more robust growth. The effort to mine, transport, and spread marl was Herculean, involving teams of oxen and carts, but the results were so transformative that it became a widespread practice across the empire. They had inadvertently stumbled upon a way to fundamentally alter the soil's chemistry. This relentless experimentation extended to more esoteric materials as well. Cato the Elder famously recommended burying a donkey's skull at the base of a fruit tree to ensure a good harvest, a folk practice that modern science can partially explain. As the skull slowly decomposed, it would leach calcium and phosphorus-essential micronutrients directly into the root zone in a slow, steady release. They also used wood ash extensively, recognizing its power to add potassium, a crucial element for fruit production and overall plant health. Every fireplace and every forge produced this valuable resource, and it was carefully collected and scattered around the bases of trees. What emerges from these texts is a picture of a culture that viewed nothing as waste. Everything from kitchen scraps to broken ceramics to animal bones was a potential ingredient in the great recipe for perfect soil. They were master mixologists, creating bespoke blends for each type of tree, a sandier, grittier mix with crushed pottery for the citron, a richer, manure-enriched loam for the fig, a marl-adjusted, well-drained bed for the peach. This unseen, painstaking work below ground was the silent partner to every glorious harvest above, the final, crucial piece in the Roman puzzle of growing the impossible. But nurturing these botanical treasures in foreign soil was only half the challenge. A thriving orchard, heavy with ripening fruit, presented a different kind of problem. It became a beacon, attracting every hungry pest for miles around. Birds, insects, and even larger mammals saw a Roman fruit grove not as a marvel of engineering, but as an all-you-can-eat buffet. Protecting this valuable investment required a new wave of innovation, one that moved from grand aqueducts to clever, hands-on solutions. The Romans, ever practical, developed a sophisticated arsenal of pest control methods that blended sharp observation of nature with their characteristic ingenuity, creating defenses that were both effective and, in many cases, remarkably prescient. For the relentless threat from above, flocks of birds descending to peck at precious figs and grapes, the Romans employed a strategy of deterrence and deception. One of the most common tools was also one of the simplest, the scarecrow. But a Roman scarecrow was far more than a stick figure in an old tunic. Columella offers detailed instructions for crafting these guardians of the grove. He recommends dressing the figure in a fearsome manner, often with polished, gleaming plates of metal or brightly colored rags that would flash and flutter in the wind. The goal was to create movement and unpredictable reflection, something that would startle birds and break their confidence. For even greater effect, some farmers would rig these figures with ropes that could be pulled from a distance, making them dance and jiggle as if alive. This added an element of unpredictable motion that static figures lacked. Beyond the scarecrow, the Romans mastered the use of sound as a weapon. They would hang thin sheets of polished bronze or tin from poles throughout the orchard. As the wind blew, these sheets would clatter and ring, creating a constant, unpredictable noise that made birds too nervous to settle. In especially valuable vineyards, they took this a step further by stationing slaves with the specific duty of making noise. These workers would be armed with clappers, two pieces of wood hinged together, or simply shout and beat on pots at regular intervals to keep the air permanently unsettled. It was a relentless, labor-intensive approach, but for a landowner determined to protect his prime harvest, the cost of a slave's time was a worthy investment against the loss of an entire crop. Yet some threats were too small for scarecrows and too persistent for noise. For the invisible armies of insects, mites, and fungal blights that could wither a fruit crop from the inside out, the Romans turned to a different kind of science, botanical warfare. They developed what might be considered the world's first integrated pest management system, using natural, plant-based concoctions to target specific threats. Their agricultural texts read like ancient recipe books for pesticides, with formulas that have stunned modern researchers for their effectiveness. One of the most widely used recipes involved the pungent juice of the wild cucumber. This plant, when crushed and mixed with water, created a potent spray that was particularly effective against ants and other crawling insects. The Romans observed that ants would avoid trails treated with this substance, and they began applying it to the bases of fruit trees to create a protective barrier. For sucking insects like aphids, they developed a soapy spray made by boiling the roots of a specific type of wild iris. The resulting liquid was rich in saponins, natural compounds that break down the insect's waxy protective coating and cause them to dehydrate and die. This is a method still used in organic farming today. Perhaps their most sophisticated insecticide came from the plant we know as hellebore, or sneezewort. Roman farmers identified two varieties, white and black hellebore, and understood that both were highly toxic. They would carefully harvest the roots, dry them, and grind them into a fine powder. This powder could then be dusted directly onto plants, or mixed with water and sprayed. The alkaloids in hellebore are a powerful neurotoxin to insects, effectively paralyzing and killing them. The Romans were acutely aware of its danger, however. Writers like Varro include stern warnings to cover the mouth and nose while applying it, showing an early understanding of the risks of handling toxic substances. Fungal diseases, which could turn a promising harvest into a moldy ruin, were fought with equally clever methods. They observed that smoke seemed to protect plants, leading to the practice of burning specific materials in pots or braziers placed upwind of the orchard. The preferred fuel was often the dung of certain animals or damp straw, which produced a thick, sulfurous smoke. We now know this was effectively fumigating the trees with sulfur dioxide, a compound that inhibits fungal growth. For treating seeds and protecting young seedlings from rot, they used a mixture made from the lees of wine, the dregs left after fermentation, which has natural antifungal properties due to its alcohol and acid content. The final piece of their defensive strategy was perhaps the most visually striking: the use of physical barriers. While we think of netting as a modern invention, the Romans were draping their most valuable trees in protective coverings 200 years ago. For the prized grapevines destined for the dessert table, they used fine meshed nets made from flax or hemp. These nets were carefully hung over the arbors, creating a ceiling that allowed sunlight and rain through but blocked birds from reaching the clusters. For smaller, more delicate saplings of exotic trees, they might wrap the entire tree in a loose cloth shroud, protecting it not just from pests but from harsh sun and wind as well. This practice was especially common for young citron and peach trees in their first few vulnerable years. Evidence from frescoes and mosaics even suggests that some wealthy landowners built elaborate pergolas covered with a form of netting or thin fabric, creating shaded, protected outdoor rooms where their most delicate fruits could ripen in safety. This multi-layered approach, combining scare tactics, natural pesticides, and physical barriers, showcases a Roman mindset that saw every challenge, whether a barbarian army or a swarm of aphids, as a problem to be solved with relentless, practical innovation. Behind every thriving specularium, every successfully grafted peach tree, and every trickle of water from a precisely managed sluice gate, stood a figure whose expertise was the true bedrock of Rome's botanical ambition: the enslaved gardener. While the elite landowners took credit for the bounty on their tables, the daily miracle of keeping these foreign treasures alive was the domain of a specialized class of horticultural virtuosos, men who carried in their hands and their memories the ancient agricultural knowledge of the very lands Rome had conquered. This was a profound and tragic irony. The empire's most celebrated symbols of domination were nurtured by the very people it had subjugated. The acquisition of these skilled individuals was a deliberate act of plunder. When a new territory was absorbed, Roman generals and officials didn't just seize gold and land. They identified and captured master craftsmen, architects, and yes, gardeners. A soldier from Gaul might be sent to work in a quarry, but a man recognized for his ability to cultivate date palms in a North African oasis or to graft apple trees in the highlands of Armenia was a prize of a different order. He was a living library of botanical knowledge, and his value was immense. These enslaved experts were often purchased at premium prices by the wealthiest senatorial families and put to work not as common field hands, but as the chief superintendents of the estate's most valuable and fragile crops. Their status was complex and paradoxical. They were property, yet they commanded a level of respect and autonomy granted to very few because their skills were so rare and so vital. The depth of their knowledge was staggering. It was not written in Latin manuals, but held in memory, passed down through generations of practice. An enslaved gardener from Egypt wouldn't just know that a date palm needed water. He would understand the precise seasonal cues that dictated the ideal moment for irrigation, the specific signs of nutrient deficiency in the fronds, and the exact technique for hand pollinating the flowers to ensure a heavy yield. A horticulturist from Syria would carry the secret for maximizing the pectin content in quinces for the perfect melomely, a process learned over a lifetime of observation. This was tacit knowledge, the kind that cannot be easily written down, but is learned through apprenticeship. A Chinese letter. It encompassed everything from reading the weather in the behavior of insects to understanding the subtle language of a tree's leaves, diagnosing problems long before they became catastrophes. Their role extended far beyond simple maintenance. These men were the estate's primary experimenters and innovators, tasked with the near impossible making Persian plants feel at home in Italian soil. They became masters of adaptation. They were the ones who would trial different soil amendments, testing new mixtures of sand, manure, and marl for each exotic sapling. They would experiment with novel grafting techniques, seeing if a peach scion would take on a particularly hardy local plum rootstock. They determined the optimal orientation for a specularium to capture the most winter sun, and devised the intricate schedules for watering and fertilizing that meant the difference between a celebrated harvest and a total loss. Every success was a testament to their skill, every failure a personal risk. The transmission of this knowledge became their most enduring yet complicated legacy. Within the rigid hierarchy of the estate, these skilled slaves trained their own replacements, creating multi-generational dynasties of horticultural expertise. A master gardener would take on assistants, often his own sons or other young enslaved men, and teach them everything he knew. This ensured the survival of the orchards and, in a small way, the survival of their own cultural heritage. The techniques for growing a perfect fig or preserving a pomegranate were, in many cases, the preserved agricultural traditions of Greece, Egypt, and Persia, now being practiced in Italy under the yoke of slavery. Their expertise became so indispensable that it could even be a path to a limited form of power and eventual freedom. A particularly valued toparius, a master gardener, might be allowed to manage his own small plot or sell surplus produced from the gardens, saving enough to one day buy his freedom and set up his own nursery, taking his priceless knowledge with him into the world as a liberated citizen. In the quiet, soil-rich world of the Roman garden, the most potent force was not the will of the emperor, but the patient, skillful hands of the enslaved men who truly understood how to make things grow. To truly grasp the scale of Roman horticultural ambition, we need to step beyond the treatises and into the soil of the gardens themselves. And there is no better place to start than the Emperor Hadrian's sprawling villa at Tivoli, a breathtaking complex that was less a retreat and more a microcosm of the entire empire, carved into the Italian countryside. Hadrian, a voraciously curious emperor who traveled every province, didn't just want paintings or sculptures of the places he'd seen. He wanted to experience them. And so, his villa featured recreations of the Athenian Lyceum, the Egyptian Canopus, and the Vale of Tempe. But his most personal act of conquest was likely his fruit gardens, which were living collections of his global dominion. Imagine strolling through his posile, a vast garden surrounded by a covered portico, where fruit trees were arranged not just for harvest, but for philosophical contemplation and imperial theater. The groves here were a living map. You could walk from a stand of hardy Gallic apple trees, past a carefully nurtured Persian peach and find yourself in a shaded grove of North African figs. The gardens were a sensory atlas of the empire, with the scent of citrus blossoms from a protected specularium mingling with the heavy perfume of ripe pears from a Greek cultivar. For Hadrian, a man deeply interested in the arts and sciences, these gardens were an open-air laboratory. He could observe firsthand how the apricot saplings from Armenia were faring on their Italian rootstock, or taste the first harvest of a new fig variety grafted by his team of enslaved master gardeners. The villa's sophisticated irrigation channels, fed by aqueducts and a complex system of cisterns, ensured that every tree, from the most common quince to the rarest imported specimen, received the precise amount of water it needed to thrive. This wasn't merely gardening. It was a performance of power using nature itself as the medium, a statement that the entire known world, in all its botanical diversity, could be collected, curated, and made to flourish under one man's command. In the very heart of Rome, another legendary green space offered a different kind of fruit-filled spectacle, the Gardens of Sallust. Originally laid out by the historian Sallust, these gardens were later absorbed into the imperial property and became a favorite retreat for emperors like Augustus and Nero. Unlike the more philosophical and spread-out villa of Hadrian, the Gardens of Sallust were an urban oasis of pure, theatrical luxury, a place designed for lavish, entertaining, and public display. They were nestled in a natural valley between the Pincian and Quirinal hills, a sheltered microclimate that allowed for the cultivation of even more delicate exotics right in the city center. Here, the cultivation of fruit was a central part of the social scene. The gardens were famous for their nemora, artificial groves where trees were planted not in orderly orchards, but in carefully designed naturalistic clusters to create a sense of wild, abundant beauty. A guest invited to a banquet here might dine in a pavilion overlooking a grove of pomegranate trees, their branches heavy with fruit that seemed to glow in the torchlight. The rustling fronds of date palms, painstakingly maintained by a team of North African gardeners, would provide shade for conversations between senators. The real marvel was the seamless integration of these botanical wonders into the architecture. Water from the Aqua Virgo aqueduct cascaded through nymphea and fountains, cooling the air and irrigating the roots of the trees, while also creating a mesmerizing backdrop of sound and movement. To eat a peach in the Gardens of Sallust was to partake in an immersive experience. It was a fruit that had likely been grown just a few paces from where you stood, a symbol of an empire so advanced it could conjure Persian delicacies amidst the urban splendor of its capital. The gardens were a testament to the fact that for Rome's elite, the finest fruits were not just a course in a meal, but an essential prop in the performance of their power and refinement. But the ultimate stage for this performance was undoubtedly the Palatine Hill, the exclusive neighborhood of emperors. The imperial palaces here, the Domus Augustana, the Domus Flavia, were not just residences, they were the administrative and ceremonial heart of the world. And their gardens were designed to reflect that supreme authority. The fruit trees cultivated on the Palatine were the rarest of the rare, the most successful experiments, the living tributes from client kings and conquered nations. This was where the most advanced horticultural techniques were deployed as a matter of state prestige. Archaeological evidence paints a picture of stunning innovation. We know from pollen analysis and root cavity casts that the peristyle gardens of the palaces featured dwarf fruit trees, cultivated in elaborate decorative pots made of marble and terracotta. These were not trees grown for maximum yield, but for their ornamental beauty and their symbolic value. A miniature lemon tree, its branches perfectly pruned and heavy with yellow fruit, could be moved to adorn a banquet hall during a winter celebration, a dazzling display of control over nature's seasons. The Palatine likely featured the most advanced specularia in the empire, their frames reinforced with bronze and glazed with the clearest, most expensive glass from Egypt, allowing emperors to harvest figs or sample strawberries months before anyone else in Rome. The fruit from these gardens was more than food, it was a political tool. An emperor might present a basket of out-of-season dates from his private grove to a favored general as a mark of exceptional honor. Or he might send a gift of preserved quinces from the Palatine kitchens to a foreign ambassador, a subtle reminder of the culinary luxuries only Rome could provide. Every aspect of cultivation, from the selection of the variety to the method of preservation, was a calculated act. The imperial gardens on the Palatine were the pinnacle of the Roman botanical project. They represented the final, logical conclusion of a drive that began with a soldier tasting a strange fruit in a distant land, the absolute concentration of the world's bounty, perfected and displayed at the very center of power, for the pleasure and propaganda of the man who ruled it all. But the Roman passion for these exotic flavors wasn't confined to the brief window of their natural harvest. A true mark of their culinary mastery was the ability to cheat time itself, to capture the essence of a summer peach or an autumn quince, and preserve it for enjoyment in the dead of winter. This drive led to the development of an entire science of preservation, a suite of ingenious techniques that allowed the taste of conquest to be savored year-round, turning fleeting seasonal luxuries into permanent staples of the Roman pantry. The most widespread and accessible method was simple drying. For fruits like figs, dates, grapes, and even slices of apple and pear, the powerful Mediterranean sun was the primary preserving agent. The process was straightforward but required skill. Fruits were carefully laid out on raised racks, often under lightweight cloth covers to protect them from insects while still allowing air to circulate. In the intense heat of an Italian summer, moisture would evaporate rapidly, concentrating the fruit's natural sugars and creating a chewy, shelf-stable product that could be stored for months in ceramic jars. For the wealthy, this process was brought indoors into specialized drying rooms, or fumeria, where a carefully managed smoky fire would not only dry the fruit more quickly, but also impart a subtle flavor that helped prevent mold. These dried fruits became caloric powerhouses for the legions, sweeteners for the poor, and ingredients for elaborate dishes for the rich, proving that the simplest methods could have the most profound impact across all levels of Roman society. For the elite, however, preservation was an opportunity for even greater extravagance. The most luxurious method was immersion in honey. The Romans well understood that honey's high sugar content and low water activity created an environment where bacteria could not thrive. For precious, fragile fruits like whole citrons, early peaches, or perfect strawberries, this was the ultimate treatment. The fruits would be carefully placed in a ceramic amphora and completely submerged in high-quality honey, which acted as a natural antiseptic barrier, sealing the fruit in a state of suspended animation. Some recipes even called for first partially drying the fruit in the sun to remove surface moisture, ensuring the honey wouldn't become diluted. Sealed with a clay lid and wax, these honey-potted treasures could last for years. To open such a jar in the depths of January was to unleash the captured perfume of a summer garden, and the fruit inside, now candied and transformed, would be served as the crowning jewel of a feast, a potent symbol of wealth that could literally stop time. Another sophisticated technique borrowed from the Roman knack for winemaking, preservation in reduced grape must. After grapes were pressed for wine, the leftover juice, known as mustum, was itself a valuable commodity. By slowly boiling this juice in large lead or bronze pots, they created two powerful syrups. Defrutum was reduced by half, and sapa was reduced by 2/3, resulting in a thick, sweet, and intensely flavored concentrate. These syrups were not just sweeteners, they were powerful preservatives. Fruits, especially tart ones like quinces, pomegranate arils, or even lemons, would be simmered in this syrup until they absorbed the sweetness, and their own pectin thickened the mixture into a sort of jam. Packed into jars and sealed with a layer of the syrup itself, these preserves would keep indefinitely. This method was particularly beloved because it didn't just preserve the fruit, it transformed it, creating an entirely new and complex confection that was highly valued in its own right. For the ultimate display of power and logistical genius, nothing surpassed the preservation of fresh fruit using actual ice and snow. This seems almost impossibly modern, but the Romans achieved it through sheer audacity and an immense expenditure of labor. Specially assigned teams of slaves, known as niverai, would be sent high into the Apennine Mountains, even as far as the Alps, to cut blocks of compacted snow and ice from protected glacial crevices during the spring. This precious cargo was then rushed down the mountainside, packed in straw and sawdust for insulation, and transported by cart or barge to the underground storage chambers of wealthy patricians. These ice houses, or glaciarii, were deep, straw-insulated pits where the ice blocks were stored, often lasting well into the summer months. The most decadent use of this resource wasn't for cooling drinks, but for creating stunning frozen desserts. The writer and statesman Seneca even lamented the extravagance of those who would consume expensive mountain snow merely to chill their fruit. A recipe attributed to Apicius describes crushing fresh snow and layering it with honey-sweetened fruit pulp in a cup, creating a primitive and breathtakingly luxurious sorbet. To serve a fresh, chilled peach in the heat of a Roman July, a fruit that had been kept in a dark cellar surrounded by melting ice hauled from a mountain peak hundreds of miles away, was the absolute pinnacle of conspicuous consumption. It was a statement that distance, season, and the very laws of nature were trivial obstacles for a Roman with sufficient wealth and will. Yet, for all their role in lavish feasts and imperial gardens, many of these exotic fruits held a far more practical and profound purpose in the daily life of Rome. They were fundamental tools of medicine. To walk into the shop of a Roman pharmacist, or pigmentarius, was to enter an aromatic world where the line between food and remedy was beautifully blurred. Jars lined the shelves, not filled with synthetic pills, but with dried fruits, seeds, syrups, and pastes, each with a specific therapeutic purpose. This was a medical system deeply influenced by the teachings of the legendary Greek physician Galen, who served the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and it was built upon a core principle: that diet was the first and most important form of treatment. In this worldview, every fruit was more than just sustenance. It was a complex substance with its own unique balance of qualities that could directly influence the four humors governing the human body: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Galenic medicine taught that health was a state of perfect balance, and illness was an imbalance often caused by an excess of one of these humors. Every substance ingested, including fruit, possessed a combination of four primary qualities: hot, cold, wet, or dry. A physician's job was to prescribe foods and remedies with opposing qualities to restore the patient's equilibrium. This is where the exotic fruits became so critically important. They weren't just novelties. They were powerful, targeted agents with specific properties that common local foods often lacked. A date, for instance, was classified as intensely hot and moist. This made it an ideal food for those suffering from conditions believed to be caused by an excess of cold and dry humors, such as a chronic cough or a frail constitution. A physician might prescribe a daily regime of dates mashed into warm goat's milk to build strength and nourish the lungs. Conversely, the incredibly sour and astringent citron or unripe grape was considered extremely cold and dry. This made it a perfect remedy for what the Romans called a bilious condition, an excess of hot, moist yellow bile that might cause fever or inflammation. A dose of citron juice in water was a common prescription to cool and dry the body's overheated system. The pomegranate was perhaps the most celebrated pharmacy in appeal, a fruit so versatile it was a remedy for countless complaints. Its use was dictated by which part of the fruit you employed. The sweet, juicy arils were considered moderately warming and moistening, good for the heart, and a tonic for the digestive system. But the real medicinal power was believed to reside in the white, intensely bitter pith that surrounded the seeds and the even more astringent rind. These parts were classified as profoundly cold and dry. Ground into a powder and mixed with wine, pomegranate rind was one of the most common and trusted remedies for intestinal ailments, particularly dysentery and parasites. Its powerful drying and binding properties were thought to halt fluxes and purge the gut of unwanted invaders. Furthermore, a decoction made from the rind was used as a gargle for sore throats and a wash for wounds, leveraging its antiseptic qualities long before the concept of germs was understood. The pomegranate was so embedded in the Roman medical cabinet that its image is sometimes found carved on ancient surgical instruments. The quince, another multi-purpose marvel, was prized for its strengthening and binding properties. Its incredibly high pectin content, which we now know acts as a thickening agent, was seen as a powerful consolidating force within the body. Quince paste, or melomely, was not just a sweet treat. It was a common prescription for those with a weak stomach or chronic diarrhea, as it was believed to fortify and soothe the digestive tract. For women's health, a syrup of quince was often recommended to, as the ancients believed, strengthen the womb. Its astringent juice was also used topically as a kind of ancient skin tonic, believed to tighten the pores and improve complexion. Even the fig, a common sight, had its specific role. Recognized as a lubricating and softening agent, a poultice of mashed dried figs was a standard treatment for boils and abscesses, applied warm to draw out impurities and soothe inflammation. A syrup of figs was likewise a well-known gentle laxative, used to counteract the binding effects of other treatments. This intricate system of fruit-based medicine reveals a sophisticated, if pre-scientific, understanding of the natural world. Roman physicians were astute observers. They may not have known about vitamins or antibacterial compounds, but they empirically understood that certain fruits produced consistent and observable effects on the human body. Their complex classification of qualities was an attempt to create a logical, predictable framework for these observations. The enduring legacy of this approach is found not in its outdated theory, but in its profound wisdom, that food and health are inextricably linked. The Roman physician, reaching for a date to nourish, a citron to cool, or a pomegranate to bind, was participating in a holistic tradition that recognized the healing power of nature's bounty, a principle that continues to resonate in our modern search for wellness. This staggering investment in exotic fruits wasn't just about impressing dinner guests. It was a sophisticated commercial enterprise that created one of the ancient world's first luxury markets. The economics of this trade were as complex and far-reaching as the empire itself, built upon a foundation of specialized roles, high-stakes logistics, and eye-watering price tags. At the heart of this system was a simple, powerful equation: scarcity plus desire equals immense profit. A fruit that was common in its native Armenia became a coveted status symbol in Rome, and the entire supply chain was engineered to capitalize on that transformation, turning agricultural products into some of the most expensive consumer goods available. The journey of a single peach from an orchard in Persia to a silver platter on the Palatine Hill involved a cast of characters straight out of an ancient economic textbook. It began with the Mercator Fructuarius, the fruit merchant. These were not simple stallholders. They were import-export specialists, often with networks of agents and scouts stationed in key provinces. They were the risk-takers, advancing money to local growers for the rights to their future harvest, financing the perilous transportation, and gambling that the delicate cargo would survive the journey and fetch a high enough price to cover their costs and turn a profit. Next came the navicularii, the shipping magnates who owned the vessels. Transporting live plants and ripe fruit required special arrangements, ventilated holds, careful stacking to prevent bruising, and the fastest possible routes to outrun spoilage. These ship owners could charge a premium for their services, knowing that a spoiled cargo meant a total loss for the merchant. Finally, at the point of sale in Rome, were the luxury greengrocers who operated in the high-end markets near the Forum or on the Via Sacra. Their shops were a world away from the bustling, chaotic common markets. Here, fruits were displayed like jewels on beds of fresh leaves or in shaded boxes, and sales were conducted with the hushed reverence of an art auction. The greengrocer wasn't just a seller. He was a connoisseur, expected to knowledgeably detail the origin, variety, and perfect ripeness of each piece of fruit to his wealthy, discerning clientele. The price differentials could be astronomical and tell us everything about the value placed on these luxuries. A common apple grown in the Italian countryside might cost as single as the lowest denomination copper coin. A decent loaf of bread cost 2 asses, but a single prime peach, imported from the East and arriving in perfect condition, could easily fetch several denarii, and since 1 denarius was worth 16 asses, that's a markup of hundreds, if not thousands of percent. The Roman satirist Juvenal mocks the decadence of a patron who serves his client a common apple while he himself dines on a massive imported pear, highlighting how the type of fruit on your plate was an instant indicator of your social standing. This wasn't mere hyperbole. Edicts from emperors like Diocletian attempted to set maximum prices on goods to combat inflation, and within these lists, we see specific, costly fruits like choice figs and citrons singled out, their prices capped at levels that would still be unthinkable for the average citizen. The fruit bowl had become a proxy for the bank balance. The physical movement of these perishable treasures was a logistical nightmare that the Romans solved with a combination of brute force and breathtaking efficiency. The famous saying, "Time is money," was never more true than in the exotic fruit trade. The entire system relied on the empire's unparalleled infrastructure, its roads and its ships. For the most durable fruits, like dates or dried figs, slow overland travel via wagon was acceptable. But for fresh, delicate stone fruits like apricots or peaches, speed was everything. This meant the sea was the preferred highway. Specialized fast-sailing ships, like the Horticulture, were employed for these precious cargoes. The fruit was packed with incredible care. We know from sources that grapes were often packed in jars of sawdust or bran to prevent them from crushing each other, and individual choice pears might be wrapped in fig leaves and placed in their own dedicated containers. Some merchants even experimented with early refrigeration, packing snow around the fruit in insulated chests for the journey, though this was ruinously expensive. Upon landing at the port of Puteoli near Naples or Ostia at the mouth of the Tiber, the race against time entered its final frantic phase. Cargo was quickly offloaded and inspected by customs officials. The best of the produce was then transferred to the fastest horse-drawn carts for the final sprint to Rome. These carts had a special legal privilege. They were allowed to travel on the public roads during the day, which was normally forbidden to commercial traffic to reduce congestion. The government recognized that this high-value, perishable trade was worth the inconvenience. The entire supply chain, from branch to marketplace, was a meticulously coordinated ballet of speed and precision, a testament to Roman logistical genius that was ultimately all in the service of delivering a perfect piece of fruit to someone willing to pay a fortune for it. This commercial engine, fueled by elite desire, didn't just move goods. It bound the provinces to the capital in a constant, lucrative flow of taste and capital, proving that the appetite for luxury could be as powerful a unifying force as any legion. Beyond their tangible value as food and medicine, these exotic fruits were woven into the very fabric of Roman spirituality and identity, serving as potent symbols in myth, ritual, and art. To understand their true cultural weight, we must look past the market stall and into the realm of gods and emperors, where a simple piece of fruit could carry the weight of the cosmos. The Roman world was one where the divine was intimately connected to the everyday, and the fruits they worked so hard to cultivate became a primary language for expressing this connection, a bridge between the human and the heavenly. This symbolic power is nowhere more vividly illustrated than in the pervasive myth of the golden apple, a story the Romans inherited from the Greeks, but made distinctly their own. You are likely familiar with the tale of the Judgment of Paris, where the Trojan prince is asked to decide which goddess Juno, Minerva, or Venus is the most beautiful, with a golden apple inscribed "to the fairest" as the prize. But to the Roman mind, this was far more than a story about vanity. It was a foundational myth about cause and consequence. That single apple was not just a fruit, but an agent of divine chaos. Paris's decision to award it to Venus, who promised him the most beautiful woman in the world, directly triggered the events of the Trojan War. For a Roman listener, this myth reinforced a crucial idea: the pursuit of exotic, beautiful, and luxurious things, even something as seemingly innocent as a perfect apple, could have world-altering, catastrophic repercussions. It was a cautionary tale about desire and the hidden costs of beauty, a theme that resonated deeply in a culture simultaneously enthralled by and suspicious of the luxuries their empire provided. This ambivalence extended into the very heart of Roman state religion, where fruits played a critical role in the most important public ceremonies. The gods were not abstract concepts. They were powerful entities who needed to be nourished and appeased. Offerings of food or supplications were a fundamental part of this contract between the mortal and the divine. While common staples like grain and wine were always acceptable, the sacrifice of a rare or out-of-season fruit was an act of heightened piety and a dramatic display of the state's wealth. Imagine the spectacle of a major public festival, like the Ludi Romani. The air would be thick with smoke and the smell of roasting meat, but among the offerings on 100 altars, you might also see a perfect pyramid of gleaming pomegranates, their bloody red arils symbolizing abundance and fertility, or a basket of rare citrons, their intense fragrance believed to be particularly pleasing to the gods and a potent purifier of sacred spaces. These were not casual gifts. They were a form of divine diplomacy, a way for the Roman state to showcase its resources and its gratitude, arguing through agriculture that the gods had indeed blessed their empire above all others. For the elite, this language of symbolism moved from the public square into the private home, where fruit became a central motif in the art that decorated their walls and floors. A walk through a wealthy Roman's villa was a stroll through a symbolic orchard. In the stunning frescoes that survive at Pompeii, fruit is everywhere. A painted basket overflowing with figs is not just a decoration. It is a direct invocation of Bacchus, the god of fertility and liberation, as figs were sacred to him. A detailed still life, known as a xenia, depicting a glass bowl of ripe peaches, was more than a display of artistic skill. It was a declaration of the homeowner's worldliness and his ability to command the fruits of distant lands. These paintings served as permanent, idealized versions of the real fruits that might be served to guests, an artistic promise of the hospitality and abundance within. This symbolism reached its most poignant expression in the realm of funerary art. On the carved marble sarcophagi of wealthy Romans, scenes of feasting and abundance were common. The deceased might be shown reclining, holding a cluster of grapes or a pomegranate, symbols of a life well lived and a hope for a joyful afterlife. The pomegranate, with its countless seeds, was especially powerful here. Because of its role in the myth of Proserpina, who ate its seeds and was bound to spend half the year in the underworld, it became a universal symbol of death and rebirth. To place a pomegranate on a tomb was to express a fervent hope that the end of this life was not an end at all, but a transition to a new beginning, a cyclical return as certain as the seasons. In this context, the fruit was transformed from a food into a profound theological statement, a small, edible key to the mysteries of eternity. Perhaps the most personal and widespread use of fruit symbolism, however, was in the celebration of a new year and new beginnings. During the festival of Saturnalia in December, it was customary to give gifts, and among the most popular were gifts of fruit. Dried figs, dates, and gilded nuts were exchanged as tokens of goodwill and wishes for prosperity in the coming year. The poet Martial, in his clever verses about Saturnalia gifts, even jokes about receiving a single, somewhat wrinkled apple from a stingy patron, contrasting it with the baskets of choice fruit given to more favored clients. This tradition highlights how these symbols permeated every level of society, from the grand state ritual to the simple, personal gesture. To give a fruit was to give a wish for life, health, and abundance. In the end, the story of Roman fruit is not just a story of agriculture or economics. It is the story of a culture that saw the entire world, from the farthest conquered province to the deepest philosophical concept, reflected in the perfect, fragile form of a peach. Yet even as the political architecture of the Western Empire crumbled, the living, breathing legacy of its orchards and vineyards refused to perish. The collapse was not a single cataclysm, but a slow dimming of central authority, a retreat of the legions, and a fracturing of the vast trade networks that had once ferried peach saplings from Persia and date palms from Africa. In this new and uncertain world, the sophisticated, large-scale agriculture of the villa estates dependent on slave labor, long-distance transport, and a stable market became impossible to sustain. But the knowledge, the precious genetic material, and the fundamental techniques did not vanish. Instead, they found a new, unexpected, and ultimately essential guardian, the network of Christian monasteries that began to spread across the European landscape. These walled communities, often established on the ruins of abandoned Roman villas, became the arcs that would carry the botanical legacy of Rome through the stormy centuries ahead. The choice of location was no accident. Monastic orders like the Benedictines, who took a vow of stability, sought to be self-sufficient. They purposefully built their cloisters in fertile river valleys, places that had once been the heartlands of Roman commercial farming. As they cleared the land, they would often discover the remnants of old orchards, gnarled, ancient pear trees still clinging to life, or hardy fig shoots sprouting from forgotten root systems. More importantly, they inherited the Roman infrastructure, the irrigation channels, the terracing, and the sun-facing slopes that were ideal for cultivation. The monks became the new curators of this inherited landscape, and their meticulous, devotional approach to work was perfectly suited to the patient art of horticulture. Within the protective walls of the monastery, the hortus conclusus, or enclosed garden, was divided into three essential parts: the herb garden for medicines, the vegetable garden for sustenance, and the pomarium, the fruit orchard. This sacred orchard was not a place of luxury, but of necessity and symbolic meaning. It was within these cloistered walls that the meticulous Roman science of grafting was preserved and practiced as a near religious duty. The copying of ancient texts was a central tenet of monastic life, and among the precious manuscripts painstakingly transcribed by scribal monks were the works of Roman agriculturalists like Columella, Palladius, and Varro. Their detailed instructions on how to splice a scion, how to train a vine, and how to store fruit became part of the monastery's practical library. The monks applied this knowledge with a methodical rigor. They became master grafters, maintaining and multiplying the old Roman varieties. A particular type of apple that had been favored on a Campanian estate might now find itself growing next to a pear cultivar from Gaul within the same monastic orchard, its survival for another generation ensured by the careful hand of a Benedictine brother. These orchards were living libraries of genetic code, each tree a volume containing centuries of selective breeding. The role of these monasteries as agricultural research stations cannot be overstated. They were nodes in a vast, informal network of knowledge exchange. As monks traveled between monasteries for chapter meetings or to found new communities, they carried with them cuttings and seeds, sacred relics of a botanical sort. A pilgrim returning from Rome might bring back a cutting of a particularly fine grapevine from the papal gardens. A missionary heading north to England or Germany would pack saplings of hardy fruit trees to establish a new garden at his mission, effectively reenacting the Roman process of botanical colonization, but under the banner of the cross. This slow, deliberate exchange ensured that the plum trees of France, the apple orchards of England, and the vineyards of the Rhine Valley all shared a direct, living lineage with the cultivars of the Roman world. The monasteries didn't just save Roman fruit, they actively disseminated it, weaving a new pan-European botanical tapestry from the old Roman threads. By the time of the later medieval period and the dawn of the Renaissance, this preserved knowledge began to flow back out into the secular world. The burgeoning merchant class in independent city-states like Florence and Venice developed a taste for the luxuries they read about in classical texts. They sought to recreate the Roman villa lifestyle, and to do so, they hired the best gardeners available, often men trained in monastic traditions. The great botanical gardens established in Padua and Pisa in the 16th century were the direct descendants of the monastic pomarium, but with a new humanist spirit of scientific inquiry. They became collection points for both the old Roman varieties and exciting new plants arriving from the East and the newly discovered Americas. The cycle that had begun with Rome was starting again. The most profound and tangible legacy, however, is hanging on a branch in any modern orchard or sitting in a bowl on our kitchen tables. Many of the most common fruits we enjoy today are the direct result of Roman bioengineering. The improved, sweet apricot they sculpted from the wild Armenian plum is the same one we eat today. The countless varieties of grapes grown for wine and for the tables stand upon a foundation of Roman viticulture and selective breeding. The fig varieties that thrive across the Mediterranean are often those that Roman agriculturists perfected. When we bite into a peach, we are tasting the fruit of an empire's ambition. Furthermore, the very techniques that define modern horticulture have Roman fingerprints all over them. The science of grafting, the concept of the greenhouse, the principles of irrigation and soil amendment, all were systemized and advanced by the Romans to a degree that would not be surpassed for over a millennium. Their relentless drive to sample, adapt, and improve the bounty of the natural world established a template that still guides our relationship with our food. The empire fell, but its palate endured, proof that some forms of conquest are achieved not with the sword, but with the spade and the careful, patient hand of a gardener. While the written records from Cato, Pliny, and Columella provide us with the Roman theory of fruit cultivation, the silent, enduring evidence buried in the earth reveals the gritty, practical reality. Archaeology acts as our time machine, allowing us to walk through the very soil they tilled and to hold the actual seeds they planted, offering a tangible connection to their botanical world that no scroll can ever match. The most dramatic and poignant archaeological site is, without question, Pompeii. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD was a human tragedy, but it created an unparalleled snapshot of Roman life, freezing a single moment in time under a layer of volcanic ash and pumice. Within the layers of hardened debris, archaeologists have discovered a treasure trove of botanical evidence, much of it carbonized. The intense heat of the pyroclastic flow didn't just burn organic material, it baked it, driving out the volatile elements and leaving behind a perfect, charcoal-like impression of the original item. This process preserved everything from entire loaves of bread to bowls of eggs, and most importantly for our story, an astonishing variety of fruit seeds, pits, and even whole fruits. In the pantry of a house known as the Villa of Julia Felix, excavators found a carbonized basket of figs, their tiny seeds still visible in the crumbled, blackened remains. In other residences, carbonized dates, olives, and grapes have been recovered, often found alongside the remains of the people who were trying to flee with their most precious possessions. This tells us something profound about the value of these fruits. They weren't just casual snacks, but valued commodities worth saving. But the most telling finds are the carbonized seeds from more exotic fare. Pits from peaches and apricots have been identified, their presence in Pompeii proving that these eastern fruits were not just theoretical imports mentioned in texts, but were actually being consumed in a relatively ordinary, albeit wealthy, coastal town. The sheer quantity and variety of this carbonized evidence paints a picture of a diet rich in fruit, a standard of living that was remarkably high for the ancient world. Beyond the tragic remains of the town itself, the gardens of Pompeii have offered an even more vivid window into Roman horticulture. The volcanic material that buried the city filled the voids left by decayed organic matter, such as tree roots. By using a technique pioneered by Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli in the 19th century, modern researchers can pour liquid plaster of Paris into these cavities. Once the plaster sets, they carefully excavate around it, revealing a perfect cast of the root system, showing its size, shape, and depth. This has allowed us to literally see the footprint of Roman gardens. In the garden of the House of the Gold Bracelet, these root casts revealed a formal arrangement of fruit trees and ornamental plants, laid out in a symmetrical pattern that blended beauty with productivity. We can see exactly where a fig tree stood next to a lemon tree, and where a row of grapevines was trained along a pergola. This isn't guesswork, it's a direct fossil of their landscaping genius. Moving beyond Pompeii, other scientific techniques allow us to read the Roman landscape like a book. Palynology, or pollen analysis, is one of the most powerful. Soil samples taken from the remains of storage jars, from the floors of ancient barns, and even from the sediment of latrines can be processed to extract ancient pollen grains. Under a microscope, these grains are identifiable to specific plant families. The presence of high concentrations of fruit tree pollen from apple, pear, or plum trees in a particular building can identify it as a site of fruit storage or processing. In a fascinating study at a Roman fort on Hadrian's Wall in Britain, pollen analysis revealed traces of fig and grape pollen in the barracks. These plants certainly weren't growing in the cold, damp north of England. Their pollen had hitchhiked on the fruits themselves, which had been transported all the way from the Mediterranean to provide a taste of home for legionaries stationed at the edge of the empire. This is archaeological evidence of the incredible reach and efficiency of Roman supply chains. Another cutting-edge technique is the analysis of phytoliths. These are microscopic, rigid silica bodies that form in the cells of many plants, and they retain their unique shape long after the plant itself has decayed. Different plants produce distinct phytolith shapes, acting like microscopic fingerprints. By analyzing soil layers at Roman sites, archaeologists can detect the presence of specific crops. This is particularly useful for plants like date palms, which leave behind very specific phytoliths, allowing us to trace their cultivation in the provinces of North Africa with remarkable precision, confirming the literary accounts of vast, irrigated date plantations. The physical remains of the infrastructure itself also speak volumes. Across North Africa, in modern-day Tunisia and Libya, aerial photography and satellite imagery reveal the ghostly outlines of long-vanished Roman farms. The lines of ancient irrigation channels, the grid patterns of field boundaries, and the ruins of farmhouses are clearly visible from the air. On the ground, archaeologists have excavated the remains of these pressing floors for olives and grapes, and have found the large ceramic dolia jars, often embedded in the ground, that were used for storing wine, oil, and preserved fruits. At the Villa of Fishbourne in Britain, one of the largest Roman residences known north of the Alps, the imprint of a massive formal garden has been found, complete with the bedding trenches for box hedges and the planting pits for trees, showing that the elite obsession with luxurious, fruit-filled gardens extended to the very farthest corners of the empire. Perhaps the most personal archaeological finds are the tools. In museums and site collections, we can see the very iron knives used for grafting, their blades worn from years of careful use. We have the remains of ceramic watering pots, identical in function to our own watering cans, and the heavy iron hose and spades that broke the ground. Holding these objects, one is struck not by the distance of time, but by the familiarity of the act. The gardener in 1st century Pompeii knelt in the soil, using a tool we would recognize, to graft a scion onto a rootstock using a technique that is still taught today. This physical evidence bridges the millennia, connecting us directly to the daily, hands-on work of the Roman horticulturist. It confirms that their written advice was not just theoretical, but was practiced with skill and dedication, leaving a mark on the land that we are still learning to read, one seed, one pollen grain, and one root cast at a time. What the Romans achieved in their orchards and gardens was nothing short of an agricultural revolution, a quiet conquest of nature that was every bit as profound as their military campaigns. Their relentless pursuit of exotic flavors wasn't merely a quest for luxury. It was the engine that drove an unprecedented wave of bioengineering innovation. They looked at a sour, wild Armenian plum and saw the potential for a sweet apricot. They encountered a tough, astringent quince and unlocked its culinary magic through heat and honey. They refused to accept the limits of their climate, building proto-greenhouses and redirecting entire rivers to cheat the seasons. This wasn't passive consumption. It was an active, obsessive drive to reshape the natural world to their will, transforming entire ecosystems in the process. Their greatest monuments were not just the stone of the Colosseum, but the living, breathing orchards that fed their people and fueled their economy. The legacy of this endeavor is not confined to history books. It is etched into the very landscape of Europe and sits on our kitchen tables today. When we stroll through a modern supermarket, we are walking through a gallery of Roman ambition. The peach you might slice into your yogurt, the apricot in your jam, the countless varieties of grapes and figs. All of these bear the indelible fingerprints of Roman horticulturists who selectively bred, grafted, and acclimatized their ancient ancestors. They didn't just import these fruits. They fundamentally improved them, turning regional curiosities into global staples. Our very concept of an orchard, with its organized rows of grafted trees, is a direct inheritance from their systematic approach to cultivation. The techniques they perfected, from soil amendment with marl to the precise art of grafting, became the foundational textbooks of Western agriculture, studied and preserved for centuries. Perhaps most importantly, the Romans gifted us a new way of thinking about food itself. They demonstrated that agriculture could be a pursuit of pleasure and quality, not just mere subsistence. They created the world's first luxury food market, proving that taste could be a powerful economic force that spurred exploration, trade, and technological advancement. In doing so, they laid the groundwork for the entire future of European cuisine, establishing a palate that valued diversity, complexity, and the sheer joy of eating. The next time you enjoy a piece of fruit, take a moment to consider its journey. That simple, sweet taste is a living echo of an empire's ambition, a testament to the countless unknown gardeners, merchants, and farmers whose skill and patience brought the world's bounty to our door, forever changing what we grow and how we eat.